Hello everyone, welcome back to our virtual Mishnah Berurah share. We're holding the Mishnah Berurah Chelik Vav. We'll be learning today Mirz Hashem, Daf Mem Hey Amud Aleph. We are continuing to learn Hilchas Tainus. We pick up today near the bottom of Mem Daled Amud Beis, 2 lines off the bottom. Siman Tov Kuf Sameches Sif Hey. Says the Mechaber, Hamisane Tanis Chaloim. If somebody is fasting a Tainus Chaloim, so somebody had a very disturbing dream, and he's fasting a Tainus Chaloim in order to be mavatal the dream. So hamisane tanis chaloim beyomtiv oy b'chaylo shalmayit. Let's say he's fasting this tanis chaloim on yomtiv or on chalamayit. We mentioned yesterday that the Gemara says when you have a disturbing dream and you want to fast the tanis chaloim, you have to fast the tanis chaloim the day after the dream, and the tanis chaloim is even doiche yomtiv and chalamayit. So what happens if you fast the tanis chaloim beyomtiv, oy b'chaylo shalmayid, oy b'rish chaydesh, oy b'chanukah upurim, oy b'erev Yom Kippurim? Any one of these days, you have to fast the tanis chaloim. However, the halacha is tzarich lemeisav ta'anisa leta'anisei. You have to fast another tainus in order to get kapara for the fact that you fasted on one of these days that you're typically not supposed to fast. Kedin hamisana tanis chaloim b'Shabbos, which is the same din as if somebody fasts a tanis chaloim on Shabbos. Somebody fasts a tanis chaloim on Shabbos, he has to fast another tainus in order to gain kapara for the fact that he fasted on a Shabbos. So too over here. If you fasted on one of these days, Yom Tov, Chalamayid, Rosh Chodesh, Chanukah, Purim, Erev Yom Kippur, you have to fast another fast to get kapara for the fact that you fasted on a day that you're normally not supposed to fast. Says the Mishnah Berurah, Ois Katan Lamed Vav, bottom of Mem Daled Amud Beis, Oy B'Rosh Chodesh. So the Mechaber gave us a list over here. Yom Tov, Chalamayid, Rosh Chodesh. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Nere da Hamisane Tanis Chaloim B'Rosh Chodesh Nisan. If somebody would fast a Tanis Chaloim on Rosh Chodesh Nisan, Oy B'Rosh Chodesh Av, or on Rosh Chodesh Av, de ein tzarich lemeisav tanis letanisai. If you fast on one of those Rosh Chodashim, you're not required to fast another fast to get kapara for the fact that you fasted on Rosh Chodesh. Yesh oimrim, because there are those that say the mitzvah lehisanois bam, that it's actually a mitzvah to fast on those days, on Rosh Chodesh Nisan or Rosh Chodesh Av. K'moshe kasav Siman Tov Kuf Pei, like we're going to learn Mirz Hashem when we reach Siman Tov Kuf Pei Sif Aleph, and I'll give you a little bit of a heads up. The reason is because Rosh Chodesh Nisan is the day of the Hakamas HaMishkan. Rosh Chodesh Nisan, we're told, the Chazal tell us that Rosh Chodesh Nisan is a day that took 10 honors. One of them is that's the day that the Mishkan was first erected. However, that's also the day that Nadav and Avihu died, because they brought Eish Zara Lifnei Hashem. They brought the Keteris that they weren't mitzvah, they weren't commanded to bring that Keteris, and they brought that Keteris, and because of that, they died. So since it's the day that Nadav and Avihu died, there is a custom by some to fast on that day. That's Rosh Chodesh Nisan. Rosh Chodesh Av is because that's Aaron HaKohen's yartzeit. So there's also a custom to fast on Rosh Chodesh Av. Therefore, if you fasted a tanis chaloim or Rosh Chodesh Nisan or Rosh Chodesh Av, you don't need a kapara for fasting on one of those Rosh Chodashim. Ois Katan Lamed Zayin, Oy b'erev Yom Kippurim. The same halacha applies if somebody fasts a tanis chaloim on Erev Yom Kippur. Says the Chavetz Chaim, V'dafka Hanoch Yomim. It's only one of these days that are listed by the Mechaber where you have to fast another fast to get kapara. Hashar Yomim she'ein oimrim tachnun. However, if you fast on one of the other days on the calendar when we don't say tachnun, so it's a shtickle a yomtiv, kechodesh Nisan, for example, if somebody fasts on any other day during Chodesh Nisan, we're in Chodesh Nisan now, the whole Chodesh Nisan we don't say tachnun. V'lag ba'omer, or if somebody fasts on lag ba'omer, v'chamisha asar ba'av, tu ba'av, u'shvat, tu b'shvat, u'bein Yom Kippurim l'sukkos, or the 4 days that are between Yom Kippur and Sukkos when we don't say tachnun. On those days, ein tzarich lemeisav tanis l'tanisai. If you fast on one of those days, you're not required to fast another fast for kapara. That's brought down from the Pri Megadim. Those are not on the same madrega as the days listed by the Mechaber. Now the Ramah says over here, if you go back to the top line of the Shulchan Aruch Mem Hey Amud Aleph, the Ramah says Va'ayin la'el simin reish pei ches sif daled. Says the Chavetz Chaim is kat lam ches sham mevuar din meisav tanis l'tanisoi. Over there we describe the halachas of somebody who has to fast such a fast where he has to get a kapara for the fact that he fasted on a day that he wasn't supposed to fast. Now over there, if you look at simin reish pei ches, the halacha is brought down that if somebody fasts a tainis chaloim on Shabbos, so now he has to fast another fast to get kapara for fasting on Shabbos, he's supposed to do that fast on Sunday. He's supposed to do it right away, the first available day after the fast, after the problematic fast, after the tainis chaloim. So if it's a tainis chaloim on Shabbos, you fast on Sunday. If it's a tainis chaloim on Yom Tov, you're supposed to fast on Isra Chag right away the next day. Unless it's too difficult, because let's realize, if somebody's going to do that, he's going to fast 2 days in a row. Now, it's true that he could eat during the intervening night, but for some people to fast 2 days in a row, even if he could eat and drink during the intervening night, that's very difficult. In that case, you could postpone the tainus. However, you're supposed to do it as soon as you can. Okay. Let's go weiter. Top line, Mem Hey Amud Aleph Sivav. Says the Mechaber, Ein tainus tzibur bebavel. The Chazal tell us, this is said by Rabbi Yirmiyah, to Gemara and Tainus Yad Aleph Amud Beis, that Ein tainus tzibur bebavel. We're not geyser a bona fide tainus tzibur in Bavel. So for example, in Eretz Yisrael, we're going to learn later on, there's a concept that if there's a tziras geshamim, if there's a drought, there'll be geyser a tainus tzibur, to be mispal for rain. Ein tainus tzibur bebavel le'aser b'melacha, to make a real tainus tzibur, which includes an iser melacha, ulahafsik mi ba'od yom, a real tainus tzibur, you stop eating the night before. I'm talking about the type of tainus tzibur, let's say that they're geyser when there's a drought. You stop eating already the night before. Depends which stage in the tanesim. There's different stages. This is in a later stage. Elo Tisha B'Av Belvad. The only time that we have a bona fide tainus tzibur outside of Eretz Yisrael, where we have an Isser Malacha, and where we stop eating the night before, other than Yom Kippur, which is a Daraisa, we have Tisha B'Av. Only Elo Tisha B'Av Belvad. And because of that, says the Mechaber, comes out another halacha. Hilkach, therefore, since in Chutz La'aretz, so we're going to see in the Mishnah Berurah that when the Mechaber says over here Bavel, that holds true to anywhere in Chutz La'aretz. Now, says the Mechaber, Hilkach, since the halacha is that we don't really have a bona fide tainus tzibur in Chutz La'aretz that brings with it an Isser Malacha and refraining from eating already the night before, Hilkach, therefore, Yachid shekibel alav tainus, a Yachid, an individual who's makabel tainus on himself, he's makabel a private tainus Yachid on himself in Chutz La'aretz, loy chayshinon shemet tainus tzibur kibel alav. If somebody says, Hareini b'tainus lamachar in Borough Park, we don't have to be chayshish that when he was makabel tainus, he meant to be makabel all the strictures of a tainus tzibur, and to say that now he has an issa malacha and he has to stop eating the night before. We don't say that in Chutz La'aretz. Why? Because in Chutz La'aretz we don't have the concept of a tainus tzibur of that type, except Tisha B'Av. And we're not going to assume that when a fellow said Areini b'tainus lamachar, he meant a tainus like the tainus of Tisha B'Av. Why are you jumping to conclusion that it means the most strict tainus that we know? And therefore, says the Mechaber, umutter bekulan, when he's makabel tainus, he's mutter in all of these things. When we call makayim, nevertheless, says the Mechaber, lechatchila toiv loymar b'shas kabbalas tainus, it's proper that when he makes the kabbalas tainus by mincha, the day before his fast, he should say, Areini b'tainus yochid lifanecha machar. He should stress the fact that when he's being makabel tainus, he only means to be makabel a tainus yochid, not a tainus tzibur. And the truth is that we already had this halacha. If you go back to Lamed Tes Amud Beis, it's Siman Tov Kuf Samach Beis in Siv Vav. The Mechaber said over there, person is supposed to say, it's the top line on Lamed Tes Amud Beis, Hareini b'tainis yochid machar. Same halacha that he says here. And over there in the Mishnah Berurah, nice Chav test, the Mishnah Berurah said, why does he have to mention tainis yochid? Asi la'afuke, it comes to take away, it comes to contrast. The loyniti, you shouldn't make a mistake. Shehu makabel alav lehisanis kichaymer tainis tzibur. Don't think that when a person is makabel tainis, he means to be makabel all the restrictions of a tainis tzibur. Since we don't want anyone to make that mistake, he should say clearly, hareini b'tainis yochid machar. And that's the same thing that the Mechaber says over here. Says the Mishnah Berurah Katan Lamites. Ein tainis tzibur beBavel. We don't have a full-fledged tainis tzibur in Bavel. Says the Chavetz Chaim v'hu adin b'chol chutz la'aretz. Over here, when the Mechaber says Bavel, that's lav dafka, doesn't mean specifically Babylon. It means anywhere in chutz la'aretz. Kidemuchach lekaman Siman Tov Kuf Ayin Hey Sif Yud, as we're going to expressly see later on in Siman Tov Kuf Ayin Hey. Ois cut mem. Since we don't have a real bona fide tainis tzibur in Bavel, Hilkach, the Mechaber said, Yachid shekibel olav tainis loy chayshinon. If a Yachid is bekabel tainis in chutz la'aretz, we have no reason to think, and we're not chayshish, that he meant to accept upon himself all of the restrictions of a full-fledged tainis tzibur. Says the Chavetz Chaim, Miloshen zeh, from the language of the Mechaber, mashma, it's implied, the Be'eretz Yisrael, right? The Mechaber is talking here in chutz la'aretz. He says, Ein tainis tzibur beBavel. We don't have a full-fledged tainis tzibur in Bavel. Therefore, if somebody's makabel tainis, we're not chayshish that he means to be makabel like a full-fledged tainis tzibur. But that's only in chutz la'aretz. So says the Chavetz Chaim, Miloshen zeh mashma, from the language of the Mechaber, it is implied the Be'eretz Yisrael, in Eretz Yisrael, im kibel olav tainis stam, if somebody would just be makabel tainis stam, he would say, hareini b'tainis l'machar, and he wouldn't specify that it's a tainis yachid, chayshinon shem et tainis tzibur kibel olav. Then we would be chayshish, that maybe he meant to accept upon himself all the restrictions of a bona fide tainis tzibur. Because in Eretz Yisrael, we do have a bona fide tainis tzibur. And he would have to stop eating already the night before. Not just the night before nightfall. And his Kabbalah's Titus would carry with it a Kabbalah of Isser Malacha. However, continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he says, possibly you could say, the Kahayim nowadays, she'ein motzoi lehisaino is hatainos tzibur hamuvuarim lekaman b'sibit tavkof ayin hesiv gimel. Nowadays, when even in Eretz Yisrael, where we don't commonly have these kind of tainis tziburs, where the geyser a tainis for atziras gishamim or etc., this is very uncommon. Mistama kavanasa yastam tainis. Could be nowadays, even in Eretz Yisrael, it's very clear that when someone's makabel tainis as a private tainis, he means a tainis yachid. He doesn't mean the restrictions of a full-fledged tainis tzibur, because such a tainis is highly uncommon. But tzarchiyun, however, the Chavetz Chaim says tzarchiyun, it has to be looked into. Vayle kamon sham sif yud, you should look in Tavkof Ayin sif yud. Masha kasavdu b'inyan zeh, Mirz Hashem be'ezras Hashem, we'll reach Siman Tavkof Ayin Hey, and we'll look into this in greater detail. Now we go to Siv Zayin. Says the Mechaber. Kishe'ira yoim shemeis aviv ay imay ba'adar. Let's say somebody has yartzeit for a parent in the month of Adar. Now, the month of Adar is a very unusual month because we know that in a shana, an Iber Yar, right, in a leap year, in a Yiddish leap year, we can have an Adar Rishon and an Adar Sheni. So, what happens if somebody has yartzeit in Adar? When does he keep the yartzeit? Adar Rishon or Adar Sheni? And this is specifically negaya over here in Hilchos Tainis because many people have the minig to fast on the yartzeit of a parent or a rebbe. So if that yartzeit falls out on Adar in an Iber Yar, when do you keep it? Adar Rishon or Adar Sheni? Says the Mechaber, Kishe'ira Yom Shemei Saviv Imay Ba'Adar, if somebody is holding a yartzeit for a parent in the month of Adar, V'hashana Mu'uberes, and it's an Iber Yar, says the Mechaber, Yis'aneh Ba'Adar Sheni. He should fast in Adar Sheni. Now, the question over here is based on a machlokes. I believe it's Rabbi Yirmiyah and Rabbi Yehuda. We have a machlokes Tanoim. When we have a leap year, what is considered the main Adar? What's the real Adar, so to speak? Is it Adar Rishon or is it Adar Sheni? Machlokes. So here, that Machlokes filters down to a Machlokes Rishonim. And the Mechaber over here is paskening that the real Adar, so to speak, is Adar Sheni. That's the Adar Stam. So if somebody's parent passed away in a non-leap year, so his parent passed away in an Adar Stam, a regular Adar. Now it's an Iber, there's an Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. Which one is the Stam Adar? Says the Mechaber, Adar Sheni. You should keep the yartzeit and you should fast in Adar Sheni. Now let's break over here for a moment and let's take a look at the Mishnah Berurah is cut Mem Aleph. Shemeis Aviv Yimai Ba'Adar Va'Ashana Mu'uberes. His parent passed away in the month of Adar, and now it's a leap year. Ritzaynoi Loimar, what the Mechaber wants to say here, the case that he's addressing is Shabashana Shemeis by Aviv, the year that his father or mother or Rebbe passed away, Loihoya Hashanam Uberes. That year was not a leap year. The year that the person passed away was a stam year. Ubashonim Haboyim Achakach, but now in later years, Isrami Shanam Uberes. You're going to land on an Iber. So now the question is, when do you keep the yartzeit? Das HaMechaber, the opinion of the Mechaber is, the Stam Adar hu Adar Sheni. According to the Mechaber, a Stam Adar is Adar Sheni. So your parent passed away in a Stam Adar, now it's an Iber, you're going to hold the yartzeit in Adar Sheni. That's the opinion of the Mechaber. Aber v'yeshar mim lahepech. However, there are those that say the other way, and they say Adar Rishon. The Gam, and furthermore, very interesting, the Chavetz Chaim says that in this case, there's another reason why you should lean towards the opinion of Adar Rishon. Why? The Gam yesh b'inyanenu tam de'ein mavirin al hamitzvahs. We don't want to be maver al hamitzvahs. We know that this fast is a mitzvah. Why is it a mitzvah? Because what's the purpose of the fast? Now that's a very good question. What's the purpose of fasting on a yartzeit? And over there we also have different things brought down. There are those, I believe it's a lavush, that says that the reason you fast on a yartzeit is because the day that you lost a parent is a day when it's Isra Mazle. Your mazel is weak on that day. You don't have good mazel on the day that you experienced a loss of a loved one. So since it's a day that Isra Mazle, it's a good day to fast and to be mispal and to do tshuva and maisim tovim and to gain zechusim. Another reason that's brought down to fast by a yartzeit is hareini kaparas mishkavoi. You want to gain kapara for the departed one. Your loved one can no longer do tshuva and maisim tovim up in Shemayim. Now I'll just break over here. I got to tell you just because it's very pertinent to this. Did you ever wonder why when you go to a kever, there's a minig. Hi, I'm in the middle of saying a shir. There's a minig that when you go to a kever, you take the kever, let's say of a parent, you take a stone and you put a stone on top of the matzeva. What's the point of that? What does that mean? You're putting a stone on top of the matzeva. So the answer is that our matzevas, when we put up a tombstone, our matzeva is one complete stone. We don't build a matzeva out of multiple stones. Why is that? Because a matzeva signifies the fact that the niftar is already finished. There's no adding on to the niftar. Whatever mitzvahs he did b'hai alma, whatever he accomplished when he was here in this world, that's what he's going to reap the rewards for in Olam Haba. He's already a finished product. You know, haskein atzmacha beproizdar, right? Olam hazeh daimel leproizdar. Lifnei traklin. This world is compared to the entranceway in front of the palace. Haskein atzmacha beproizdar. Prepare yourself in the proizdar, in the entranceway, and do mitzvahs over here, and then you'll reap the rewards when you go into the palace, when you go into Olam Haba. So when somebody leaves this world and he goes to the next world, he's complete. Whatever he is, he is. That's why we put up a matzeva, which is one complete piece. There's no adding on to it. However, there is an exception. The exception is, if a child goes ahead and does mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim because of what he was taught by his parent, or if a Talmud goes ahead and does mitzvahs and ma'asim tovim based on the teachings of his Rebbe, then he's garnering new chusim for his parent and for his Rebbe. So a child or a Talmud could go and add on to the parent or to the Rebbe. So he could take a stone and he could add on to the matzeva. So too they bring down the reason to fast by a yartzeit is because you could get kapara for the nifter by your fasting. Okay, so that's why we fast. So the fast has an aspect of mitzvah. And we know that we always have a concept of ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. We don't want to pass over mitzvahs. So if now it's adoration, and we have opinions that hold that adoration is the main ador, so now we have the opportunity to be bekayim the mitzvah and adoration. We don't want adoration to pass by and wait to ador sheni. So the Chavetz Chaim says that's another reason why we should lean towards following the opinion of ador rishon instead of ador sheni. Interestingly enough, this also has ramifications on Pesach. There's a lot of machlokes in how you should set the ka'ara up. I think most people use the ka'ara of the ari. Personally, I use the ka'ara of the gra. Now, the gra's ka'ara was based on the concept of ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. According to the gra, all of the items that you're going to use for mitzvahs by the seder go on the ka'ara. So, for example, according to the gra, the matzahs go on the ka'ara. So my ka'ara is very big. It's a very big tray. And you follow the rule of ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. Therefore, the first thing on the ka'ara, the closest to you, is the karpas, because that's the first mitzvah. You're going to eat the karpas. So the karpas goes closest to you on the right, and on the left goes the mei melach, the salt water that you're going to dip the karpas into. Next, after that, goes the matzahs, because that's the next mitzvah you're going to do, is the eating of the matzah. After that, you're going to eat maror. So on the right side, you have the maror. On the left side, you have the charoisis. Then finally, you have the zroya and the beitza all the way at the end of the ka'ara. So it's all based on ein mavirin ala mitzvahs. We don't pass over mitzvahs. Okay. So far we saw over here in Siv Zayin, we saw the opinion of the Mechaber. Let's just read from the beginning of Siv Zayin the words of the Mechaber. Kishi'ira yom shemei sava va'imai ba'adar. Somebody has yartzeit for a parent in Adar. Va'ashana mu'uberes. And now this year is an Iber Yar. And he wants to know when should he keep the yartzeit. Yesana ba'adar sheni. The Mechaber says you keep the yartzeit in Adar sheni. Hago, however, says the Ramah, v'yeshayimrim di yesana b'rishon. However, there are those that say that the Ikar Adar is the first month. So there are those that say you should keep the yartzeit in Adar rishon. Imloi shemeis bishnasa ibur ba'adar sheni. Unless the parent passed away in a leap year, and he passed away in Adar sheni. So then the yartzeit is Adar sheni. The oz noyagim l'sanis b'sheni. Then you keep the yartzeit in Adar sheni. And the Ramah says v'chein haminig l'hisanis b'rishon. He says the minig is that a stam Adar, that if somebody was nifter in a stam Adar, so then you fast in Adar rishon, not Adar sheni. Miu, however, says the Ramah, yesh machmirin, there are those that are machmir lehisanis b'shnehem, to fast both Adar rishon and Adar sheni. Okay, so here we had the opinion of the Mechaber. The Mechaber said Adar sheni. We have the Ramah that says that there's a yesh omrim that it's Adar rishon, not Adar sheni. Just want to check one thing here. Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So the Ramah said that no, some are noyig to fast in Adar rishon, and he says v'chein haminig l'hisanis b'rishon, but we have those that are machmer to fast in both. Says the Chavetz Chaim in Ois Cotton Membeis, a long Mishnah Berurah over here. That's a tad complex. Let's take a look. Says the Mishnah Berurah. Miu yesh machmirin lehisanis b'shneim. We have those that are machmir to fast both in Adar rishon and Adar sheni. Ayin b'Magen Avram, the Chavetz Chaim says, take a look at the Magen Avram. Shamaseku concludes, if somebody took on a neder, somebody made a neder, he made a Kabbalah that is almost the equivalent of a neder, that he's going to always fast on the yartzeit of his parent or his Rebbe, then then he has to go ahead and he has to fast both Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni whenever there's an Ibriyar. Techein hu ha'ikar ledina, because me'ikar adin, he says that's what you should do. V'chein kasav agra. So if we're dealing with a neder, then you should be machmir and you should take a fast both Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. Achein, however, im loy kibel alav beferish, if he didn't mamish make a Kabbalah, if he didn't speak out a Kabbalah verbally, that he's always going to do this, that he's always going to fast on the yartzeit, rak mitzad minhaga, it's only a minig, sheminig lehisanois yoim shemes by ave ve'imai, he's just doing it as the minig, but he's not doing it mitam neder, then ein tzarech lehisnag le'olam, then he doesn't have to do ela k'may shenag b'pam rishayna, he should follow whatever he did the first time, kishemisrabe lo yashana mu'uberes. So what he's saying is like this. If we're worried about a neder is very chamor. We treat nedarim very stringently. So if somebody made a neder, I'm always going to fast on the yartzeit of my parent or of my Rebbe, and now it comes an Ibriyar and he's not sure, should I do Adar Rishon or Adar Sheni, then the Gra, we're machmir, Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni, because we're playing with fire, we're playing with a neder. But let's say he's not doing it as neder. He never made such a verbal commitment. He knows that there's a minute to fast on the yartzeit, and he doesn't know what to do. Then the Mishnah Berurah says, okay, what did you do the first time this happened? Your parent was nifted 20 years ago. This is not the first time it came up that there was an Ibriyar. What did you do the first time? Whatever you did the first time, that's what you should continue to do. Why? Because whatever you did the first time, so that's what you established the minig. And Mistama, that's what your das was. And we have a difference of opinion. We have the Mechaber says Adar Rishon, the Mechaber says Adar Sheni, the Ramah seems to lean to Adar Rishon. So okay, so Nahar Naharu Pashte, whichever one you do, you do. However, continues the Chavetz Chaim, and he says, Achein, however, Bepam Rishona Gufa, how about the very first time it ever happens? In Bali Malech Ketzad Lasais, if somebody comes and asks a Shaila, the very first time this ever happens, person comes, he says, my father passed away a couple of years ago, Stam Adar, this is the first time I have this situation where I have to keep the yartzeit in an Ibriyar. What should I keep? Adar Rishon or Adar Sheni? So then says the Mishnah Berurah, Hanachain loimer lo yisana b'shneim. The most proper thing would be to say that he should fast both Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. Achein, im kasha lo lehisanis b'shneim. If it's somebody for whom fasting is very difficult, and it's hard for him to fast both, in that case, the Chavetz Chaim says it would be better that he should pick Adar Rishon, because the Ramah said, the Ramah said the minig is to keep Adar Rishon. So if somebody's coming and asking a shayla for the very first time, tell him he should do Adar Rishon. Achein, however, says the Chavetz Chaim, ha'avelim ein tzrichin litin like Kaddish ela pamachas. Chavetz Chaim says there's another ramification of when he's going to keep the yartzeit, and that is that back in those days, the minig was not the minig that we have now, that everybody says Kaddish. The minig then, and this is still the minig in some places. I encountered this when I was saying Kaddish. The minig still is in some places that only one person says Kaddish at a time. So you have a certain amount of Kaddeshim by davening. They give this aval one Kaddish, they give this aval one Kaddish. Sometimes you don't have enough Kaddeshim, and sometimes the aval doesn't get to say a Kaddish. So now this person comes and he wants to be machmir. He wants to hold yartzeit 2 days, Adar Rishon and Adar Sheni. So on that, the Mishnah Berurah says the other avelim, on other chiyuvim, are not mechuyev to give up a second kaddish for his chumrah. Achenu avelim ain't tzrichin liter like kaddish ala pamachas. They only got to give him one kaddish. And And the Marshal seems to say the same thing. Now let's say somebody doesn't know exactly what day his parent passed away. Yivrar lo yom echad. He should pick one day. He's bringing this Marshal as a precedent for this idea that the Avelim don't have to give up more than one day. So Nebuch, we had this by survivors. Not all of the survivors knew precisely which day their parents were Nebuch killed, went on Kiddush Shemayim in the camps. My father, Olav Shalom, knew when his parents were nifter in Auschwitz. He had edus from the Sander commandos who told him that they saw his parents go Nebuch into the gas chambers. So he knew exactly when his yartzeit was. But many did not know precisely when the yartzeit was. So in that case, Yivrar lo yom echad, they should choose a day to keep the yartzeit. Ach al yasik gvul acherim lemer kaddish. But whichever day they picked, since they don't know for a certainty that that is the real yartzeit, they can't pull away a chiyuv from somebody else. Now we have a couple of interesting cases here. Says the Mishnah Berurah. In Meis Aviv b'yom rishon derosh chodesh adar sheni. Let's say somebody's parent passed away in an Ibriyar, and he passed away on the first day of Rosh Chodesh of Adar Sheni. Now, the first day Rosh Chodesh of Adar Sheni, what date is that? That's the 30th day of Adar Rishon. When you have 2 days Rosh Chodesh, it's because the first month is a Moleh. The first month, we know that there are months in the Hebrew calendar that have 29 days, and there are those that have 30. A Moleh has 30, a Chasar has 29. So now, if Adar Rishon is a Moleh, so then there's 2 days Rosh Chodesh, Adar Sheni. The first day is not the first day of Adar Sheni, it's the 30th day of Adar Rishon. So this person's father passed away on Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni, which is really Yom Lamed, it's really the 30th day of Adar Rishon. Now, what does he do on a Stam year? On a Stam year, you have a problem. On a Shana Pshuta, you got a problem. Because on a Shana Pshuta, Adar is always Chasar. On a regular year, Adar only has 29 days. So now, what exactly do you do? There is no 30th day of Adar on a Shana Pshuta. And there also is no Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni on a Pshuta, because there is no Adar Sheni. So when do you keep yartzeit? So says the Chavetz Chaim like this. Yis'ane l'shana haba sha'is a Shana Pshuta. On the next year when it's a Shana Pshuta, he should fast b'yom aleph de Rosh Chodesh Adar. He should fast on the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar. Shvat is Moleh, so Shvat has 30 days. So the 30th day of Shvat is the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar. So we look at it and we say, okay, your father passed away on the first day Rosh Chodesh of Adar Sheni. So in a Shana Pshuta, you keep the yartzeit on the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar, even though it's Rosh Chodesh Adar Rishon, and it's not the 30th day of Adar Rishon. V'loi be'esrim v'tisha b'ai. But don't think that you should go ahead and you should keep the yartzeit on the 29th day of Adar Rishon, because that's the day before Rosh Chodesh Adar Sheni. No, you keep it on Rosh Chodesh, on the first day of Rosh Chodesh Adar. The la'olam Adar shel Shana Pshuta oimei takas Adar Sheni shel Shana Mu'uberes. Because the month of Adar in a Shana Pshuta, that is instead of Adar Sheni on a Shana Mu'uberes. Okay, first interesting case. Second interesting case. Umi shemeis aviv b'yom rishon de Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Let's say somebody's father passed away on the first day Rosh Chodesh of Rosh Chodesh Kislev. U'leshana haba haya cheshvan chasar. The next year, cheshvan is not Moleh. For Rosh Chodesh Kislev ein el yom echad. Now there's only 1 day Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Some days, some years there's 2 days Rosh Chodesh Kislev. Some years there's 1. Now this person's father was niftar on the 30th day of Cheshvan, which is the first day Rosh Chodesh of Rosh Chodesh Kislev. But the next year, Cheshvan is a chasar. There's only 29 days. What do you do? Tzarech iyun masa yisane. The Chavetz Chaim says difficult. We have to figure out when you should fast for the yartzeit. Im be'esrim v'tishva lecheshvan. Maybe the 29th day of Cheshvan, Shuhu Yom Echad Lifnei Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which is the day before Rosh Chodesh Kislev, and his father passed away on the first day Rosh Chodesh of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, which is the day before the second day Rosh Chodesh of Chodesh Kislev, which is the first day of Chodesh Kislev. So maybe this person should fast on the 29th day of Cheshvan, because that's the first day, it's the day before the first day of Kislev. The Hala'ilam Yom Sheni, Iker Shabayim Lamayadis Bisheni, because we know that the second day of Rosh Chodesh is really the first day of the month. So that means that even though we call the day that his father was nifter the first day of Rosh Chodesh Kislev, really it's the last day of Cheshvan. So maybe he should keep yartzeit on the last day of Cheshvan, even though his father was nifter on the 30th day of Cheshvan, and this year there is no 30th day of Cheshvan, it's the 29th day of Cheshvan. But still in all, he should keep the yartzeit on the last day of Cheshvan. That's one way of looking at it. Or perhaps you should look at it differently. Nema, or maybe you should say, Dal kol panim have a shame Rosh Chodesh alav. When people ask him, when was your father nifter? He says, first day Rosh Chodesh Kislev. He doesn't say the last day of Cheshvan, so maybe he should keep the yartzeit of Rosh Chodesh Kislev. V'lechen yikpa yom yartzeit ata gam ken Rosh Chodesh. And in the brackets he says, V'loy lehisano ispai. Obviously this doesn't mean that you should fast to ha'ein misanin Rosh Chodesh, because on Rosh Chodesh Kislev you can't fast unless it's a tanis chaloim. Kidul kamei, like we're going to see later. Elo lahadlik by ner, just to light a yartzeit licht, v'lam kaddish, to say kaddish. So here we have this question. Umasik Magen Avram, he says that the Magen Avram concludes, the Mishana Rishayna Lemisas Aviv, if the first year after his father passes away, Hashana hi chasera, if in that year Cheshvan only has 29 days, Ukamaisha kasavdu, v'imkein adayin lo hikba ha'inyan alav b'neder. If this is the first time that he's dealing with the question, so he doesn't have a neder yet, we're not dealing with a neder, Yikba yartzeit be'esra v'tishel l'chodesh Cheshvan u'kamoisha kasavnu atam. Then you should follow the rationale to fix the yartzeit to the last day of Cheshvan, because his father was nifter on the last day of Cheshvan. Aval kishashana rishayni higam kein malaya. But if the first year Cheshvan is malay, so you have 2 days of Rosh Chodesh, like the year that his father passed away, im kein tzarich likava hayoim b'Rosh Chodesh. Then you have to make the yartzeit on Rosh Chodesh, because his father was nifter on the first day of Rosh Chodesh, and the very first year that it's the Geya, there is a first day Rosh Chodesh Kislev. So obviously you're going to make the yartzeit the first day Rosh Chodesh Kislev, like when his father was yartzeit. V'lachein, and once you're doing it that way, the first year, af bashanim abam achareim, then all following years, af shehem chaserim, even when Cheshvan is chasar, yikba b'Rosh Chodesh, you should follow the meaning of the first time you did this, and you should keep the yartzeit on Rosh Chodesh. There are achronim to say that you should always do it on Rosh Chodesh. The Welt is noyeg like the Magen Avram. Okay, let's see if we could knock off Sifches over here. Says the Mechaber Sifches, Ein sarach lehis anois elo biyoim misas aviv. When somebody has this minute to fast on the yartzeit for a parent, it's the day of the month that his father or parent or Rebbe was nifter. V'loy b'yom kavura, you don't follow the day of the kavura. Says the Mishnah Berurah cut Mem Gimel. Very interesting. The Chavetz Chaim says, like I translated, what does the Mechaber mean when he says Ein tzarich lehisanos elo b'yom misas aviv? Says the Mishnah Berurah cut Mem Gimel, Dahainu de'imeis b'shloisha yamim le'ezeh chodesh. If somebody's parent passed away on the third day of the month, tzarich lehisanos b'shana haba gamkein b'shloisha yamim lechodesh zeh. You keep your fast and you hold the yartzeit the third day of the month. Even if it's not the same day of the week. Last week it was a Wednesday, this week it's a Sunday. It doesn't matter. You follow the day of the month. You don't follow the day of the burial. Says the Chavetz Chaim, this halacha is true, that the yartzeit is based on the Yom HaMisa, not the Yom HaKfura, even the first year after the P'tira. Why? What's different about the first year that the Chavetz Chaim has to tell you this? Explains the Chavetz Chaim, even on the first year after the P'tira, the 12 months of Avelus follows the day of the Kvura, not the day of the P'tira. So you might think that on the first year, the yartzeit should not follow the day of the P'tira, it should follow the day of the Kvura, because the Avelus follows the day of the Kvura. Afilu harchi, yartzeit hu b'yom hamisa, the yartzeit follows the day of the P'tira. Says the Chavetz Chaim further, v'loy mebaya, we don't need to say this, it's certainly this way. Im yom hakfura haya l'macharas yom hamisa, if the day of the Kvura was the day immediately following the day of the P'tira, in that case I don't have to tell you this. In that case, the 12 months of the Avelus also is completed on the Yom HaMisa next year. Even in the case where the burial took place 2 or 3 days after the Yom HaMisa, in such a case, in that case, the 12 month of Avelus goes beyond it goes past the anniversary of the Yom HaMisa, because the Shnei Masar Chodesh goes after the Kvura. So if the Kvura was 3 or 4 days after the day of the P'tira, so then the Avelus of 12 months is going to continue beyond the anniversary of the Yom HaMisa. Still in all, the yartzeit is on the day of the anniversary of the Yom HaMisa. We always set the yartzeit and the anniversary of the Yom HaMisa. However, those that say that in this case that we just described, where the Kfura took place several days after the Yom HaMisa, then the yartzeit of the first year does go after the Yom HaKfura, but other years, then the yartzeit always is based on the anniversary of the day of the P'tira. Okay, Baruch Hashem, we accomplished the page. Thank you so much for joining me for limud HaTorah. Discuss of limud HaTorah should be banking against Klal Yisrael. The Rebbe Hashem should send Yeshua's refuahs and parnasa to all those in need. Especially, we want to be mispal for refuah shalema. I really should announce it before this year. Somehow I always forget. Our limud HaTorah should be a schus for Shlomo Zalman ben Mesha, Yisrael Tzvi ben Edel Ruchama Roiza, and Menachem Aryeh ben Dina Yehudis. They should all have a refuah shalema. B'soi Sharchel Yisrael. I hope everybody's Pesach preparations are going smoothly and well. Don't knock yourself out too much. Try to have in mind, think about what's coming, the Seder, the mitzvahs, Sipri Yitzias Mitzrayim, Matzah, etc. We should have kayach to be mekayim the mitzvahs. Be well.